Okay, so fantastic. I think we're safe to say we're up and running now. GloNet is happening, and we're all together with Sendai and Manchester. We now move into another phase where we have a more long, deep, inspirational speaker, John Worthington, who's going to talk to you about his work heading up a leading firm, and I'm sure is going to give us a very inspirational and exciting talk. If I can welcome to the stage John Worthington. Thank you.
Thank you. And welcome Sendai and welcome Manchester. Actually, it's lovely to be here, and even nicer to be reminded, actually, of my times in Japan. Looking at those images, the thing which really struck me was I kept on wanting to anchor myself, and then I saw that little image through that window on the left-hand side. What I want to do is try and give a conceptual framework to what we're talking about here. The city is a network of places, and places as experiences which stimulate collaboration, interaction, and ultimately innovation. Because at the end of the day, we can talk about creativity, but we want to talk about creativity harnessed to actually economic success. These two things go together. Let me just see where the thing is. Where's the... Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sendai. City. City as a center is moving from a center, you can see Copenhagen, to a network of places, the Øresund. Suddenly you've shifted from one place, 500,000 people, to a place of 3.5 million people. And in our minds, we have three sorts of cities. Over on the left, it's lost its name, but the city of the imagination. That's my city, which is Boston for education, Venice for pleasure, and so on and so forth. The city of convenience, where I will go anywhere to get which is most effective what I want. I will maybe drive out to an IKEA or into the center where I want to get a beautiful piece of jewelry. And finally, the city of place, which has tended to be what we call our cities. That's probably no more than 1 kilometer across, and it is, in fact, very physical. But all those three things add up to the city. Similarly, organizations are the same. I love this image of Cisco. What it says, of course, is Cisco is a value network. It includes competitors, strategic partners, standard groups, all who come together. It's whom the company never exchanges money or tangible goods with. Cisco estimates its intangible exchanges outnumber the tangible exchanges by 2 to 1. In other words, what you see is only the tip of the iceberg. It's that network around you. Rather like my city again, it's that network which is most important. And we've got virtual and physical space. But we need to think of both at the same time. Because as Bill Mitchell beautifully puts it, we will gravitate to settings that offer particularly cultural, scenic, and climatic attractions. That's the physical. Sometimes we will network to avoid going places. But sometimes still, we will go to places to physically network. Two things at once. The virtual space, which is convenient and efficient, but the more we have that, the more we desperately need the place which we can come to, which makes statements. It's meaningful and symbolic, what we heard about just now. And when we get there, we've actually now got to manage different sorts of space. What we used to call the public realm, that which is owned, governed by the community. tends to be shrinking. That's loose fit, it's underfunctionalized, it's organic, it's heterogeneous, it's diverse, but it always has a dominant culture. But alongside it, we have the semi-public. That space which is inside other people's buildings, but we can move through. It's precise, functional, the shopping center, etc. And then the third layer, what I call the privileged, that we are invited into, the cafe we go into. We have to buy a drink to be there. Now it's interesting, that semi-public space, the hotel foyer, traditionally we would have thought of that as privileged. We had to go in, buy a drink and so forth. We're getting more confidence now. We go in, we have a meeting, we don't even buy anything, and we walk out again. It's beginning to happen like that, which is very interesting. And there's a new property paradigm. Firms, instead of saying, I've got to own all my space, are increasingly beginning to get core space, that which is highly iconic or highly specialized. Then they've got what I call flexi space, that which is owned by somebody else, which they maybe have for 3 or 4 years and move on. But increasingly, the third type of space, which could be as much as 30% of the space you use, is what I call on-demand or just-in-time. Where we don't need to actually have it at all, we use other people's, we share. So we're getting a very different mix, which is giving us a very different sort of city. We've got, in fact, a shift from product to experience. It's not just the space, it's the space plus the services inside, plus the expression of that to add up to a total experience. I love Pine and Gilmore's work, which says, you know, the coffee bean might have cost you 15 cents. But the cup of coffee in Venice St. Mark's Square might be $15 because you're paying for all that add-on experience. Where's the value? The value is no longer in the product, it's in actually what you add to it in the total experience. We do a lot of work with big corporations, but actually, critically, what they're interested in is creativity. This is the pharmaceutical industry. What's happening there is you've got to speed up the process as you move towards generic drugs, and this is what we call the innovation hubs, happening around the world, where essentially you're bringing the researchers, the marketeers together, and you're making a place where you can actually exchange. These are the places part, or they might be networks which are very distributed, places you can come together. Now, what's that doing to universities and places of education? Well, again, you know, it's a spread as the focus of learning innovation, which can be the home, the workplace, shopping, etc., all those coming together. We're increasingly seeing this as what we call a learning landscape, which can be spread throughout the city. And there's a changing way of learning. It's more collaborative, it's integrated, it's blended across all these different things together, it's immersive, and it's hybrid. And that also means we rethink the way we think of space. Space, increasingly, the space we used to call as non-functional space, corridors, etc., staircases, is highly functional because it's a place where interaction, informal interaction takes place. So suddenly we have to change our mindsets. From thinking about this is unusable space, it becomes, in fact, the center where things happen. Staircases, corridors, touchdown places, the garden outside. All these are now the key places we want. So we're changing our perception of space, which is incredibly important. And of course, we're getting new sorts of collaborative spaces. Technology is a key element. How do we then provide these spaces? And are these spaces just going to be specialized, or are these going to be the semi-public spaces, the open spaces where we can interact? So, back to space and place. Well, of course, cities are really a continuous interaction of people in space. I would argue that really enjoyable cities are a result of designing meaningful spaces, that's the architect, which people can then be stimulated to interact to make memorable places. It's those two things coming together that we're really chasing. Fascinating to me, we're talking about experiment. We're at a moment which is very, very important, I think, that we're beginning to talk about transitional spaces. Instead of thinking we've got to comprehensively plan it all and work it all out in detail, go through participation exercises, why don't we just do it? And if it works, fine, it becomes transitional, it's transformational. If it doesn't, get rid of it. Now, this is going to be hugely important. I think what's happening in Broadway is absolutely wonderful, Jan Gale, where you simply say, we're going to paint some lines on the ground to give less space to the cars, more to the people. We'll put some chairs out and see if it works. Okay, we didn't have to go through planning. We've subversed all that. We just do it. That is going to be critical. And that's what I think we're beginning to see. And I was delighted to see we were beginning to talk about installation art, because that is where the new architecture is coming from. The things that we do temporary, which then become permanent. Okay, let's take an example. King's Cross in London. 20 years ago, they started planning this huge extension to the two stations. It's only just beginning 20 years later. Now it's actually, all around the edge of it, been happening all the time. But that wasn't seen as the plan. That is the transitional. That's all these things which can happen. So actually, what you have is that huge scheme, but around it, you have, in fact, other things happening. You've got this wonderful area called the Regent's Quarter, which is existing buildings, new buildings, a patchwork which has been put together. A very much more exciting place in many ways than the new comprehensive development. And within it, one of the buildings, which is a wonderful building in many ways, is King's Place. Now that isn't just a traditional office building. It actually has below it a concert theatre, which is also used as a place for conferences like this. It's, again, overlapping uses, doubling things up. It's not just one use now. Overlapping uses, exhibitions, the whole lot, as you can see in the book. And semi-public space, which you can wander through, wander out of. That is the new sort of place. And also, a building which was seen as a fine building, it was listed, but nobody knew what to do with it, is now the Hub. I do recommend the Hub as being very interesting. There's the reception. Instead of a reception area, huge, you just come in the door and pass the curtain. And what you can then do, it's built around an ethos, an ethic. So it's a community, which is a community of people. It's not just there. There's ones around the world which are developing now. But this is a place you can come, and the membership is tiered. You could have 5 hours to full time. And as, in fact, your turnover increases, so you spend more, you pay more money. So they're relating it back to the kind of growth of the firms themselves. Now, I talked about this intermediate space and the semi-public. We're very used to drawing pictures of flat cities where we do what we call a figure ground. You just see the roofs. But the city isn't that. It's now what's going on inside. Take this drawing, some work we've been doing. There's actually what's going on underneath the St Pancras station. As a public space, you can walk through it and come then to the British Library. But I've opened it up because actually you can walk through the British Library now. It's all part of the public realm. So that's your new city. Some of it's inside buildings, some out, but I've taken that away. It's the old Nolli plan of Rome. Okay? Now, what's the British Library? The British Library is an amazing place of interaction. It is absolutely what we're talking about. It's buzzing with people, buzzing with things happening. And so it is just another part of this whole network. Ravensbourne College, which we've been working with, again, their model is in fact level one, space which is given off and is for the total community, the city as a whole, right through to quite specialized spaces which you're actually renting specific functions. So that is now the community totally integrated, where the city becomes the university or the school, and similarly, the school or the university becomes the city. Merge it, bring the two together. In the Academy of Urbanism, we're looking at how do we bring this together. And I talk about a university, which has an integration between communities of learning, communities of people, living, if you like, and communities of practice. But more important, those can be formal, the City of Manchester, informal, the Big Life Company, or actually virtual, which is the sort of thing we're talking about here. All of those things play their part. And I'm interested in how do we build this network to start to make change happen? Experimentality, the very thing you're talking about here. Well, here's one idea, what I call city X-rays. City X-rays aren't just going out and finding measures. They're going out, and whilst you're collecting data and finding information and measuring, you are changing perceptions, because you're doing it not with experts going out, but groups of people who are going to use that place later, and beginning to make ideas for action. Creative Dalston, I do recommend look at this, the way that's doing, you know, the website they had, A Month in Dalston, a blog, when they went out and mapped, they then found places they could meet, which ultimately then became the next stage and the place they used for having their open events, and so on and so forth. You're merging things. You're not doing it linearly now. You're beginning to do things all at the same time. So what are the opportunities? Well, the first absolutely big opportunity is use space and time and technology more intensely. We have these huge areas. When we took large hospitals or universities and dumped them in the countryside, they got increasingly good communications now, but how do they then make them living places? We can build them back as pieces of city. So there's a real challenge there. The new urbanism, in my mind, isn't make nice little places again. It's dealing with those placeless places out there. And secondly, how do we make really thriving local economies, which goes everything from, as I showed in the hub, the tiniest embryo firm to the mature firm, and they work together. They're all needed to make a healthy environment. So, just to finish, what do we got? We're going to have a city, I believe, which has simpler buildings. Buildings will be simpler, so we can adapt them. Greater agility, more mobility, both physical, but also agility of the mind. The ability to actually see different ways of doing things, changing perceptions and changing paradigms. But then more complicated cities in their management structures. That's going to be interesting. And a totally redefinition of what is a city. The city is no longer defined by political boundaries. In our minds, as I showed from my first slide, we don't care about that. I couldn't care less if it's called Manchester or Salford or the rest. I just have a spectrum of places I use. Thank you.